Please welcome SingleStore Solutions Engineer, Justin Strnatko.
Hopefully you guys liked the first talk. If not, very sorry. This one is longer and slightly different. But I'll start it off in a little bit of a different way. So last time I talked about marketing. This time a little bit more about financial services. Kind of makes sense. But before I do, I'll give you a fun fact. So if you guys want to talk to me afterwards, great kind of conversation starter. I am actually a dual citizen, but I won't tell you the country. Feel free to come ask if you'd like, and then we can also talk about financial services. No problem there. And so the idea here of today is realistically to show where SingleStore works in this space, not just from an architectural perspective, but more importantly from a positioning perspective. How do we view our customers? How do we view the space? And kind of where are we going, right? And so when we start to think about this high-level agenda, I like to believe pretty straightforward. The goal here at the end of the day is to make sure this is kind of as easy as possible. So we'll talk about the landscape. We'll talk about some of what we call our archetypes, our point of view in the space. And then, of course, we'll talk about some of the differentiation, where we've worked and where we succeed, and more importantly, what we can do for you, kind of the big idea at the end of the day. So high level, and you can kind of read these stats. As of today, in 2025, the financial services kind of space as a whole globally represents $36.1 trillion, right, in market capitalization. By really 2029, about 4 years from now, that's going to increase by $11 trillion. So you can clearly see that the pace of change is quite high. Now that's being driven in many cases, right? You can see the 7.1% CAGR, but realistically, this is really being driven by modernization, by change. Now, this number down at the bottom, 96%, is really around the idea that consumers are changing their habits. The consumers themselves, either directly or indirectly, are using financial technology services. I can think back a couple years ago when robo-advisors and, more importantly, robo-investors started coming out, Wealthfront being a really great example. At the time, I was in college, and I didn't know much about investing, so I thought, hey, let me put some money in there. That's a simple example, and that sort of complexity in the market has actually really expanded dramatically. Wealthfront is now one of many, and more importantly, these sort of financial technology companies are either, right, more importantly, being embedded very heavily into traditional finance applications. And so users themselves, again, whether they know it or not, are, more importantly, actually using financial technology, and that's really going to drive a lot of the growth. And so when we start to think about what this really means, we have this idea that financial services today are, right, kind of about analyzing opportunity and risk in real time. Moving away from the tradition of kind of slow analytics, analytics that are taking long periods of time, and more importantly, where we may not have the time to make it, right? And so if we start to analyze this further, these are just major trends. Real-time payments and settlement and liquidity, what we would call personalization, right? And AI is a great example of this. AI is a democratizer, if for nothing else. The idea is that by leveraging AI in both its current and future state, what we can do is create customer profiles, take those profiles, load them in, and then start to cross-sell or cross-pollinate products. If you're, now like me, I use Chase, for instance, and one of the most interesting examples of this is the fact that as I scroll down, beyond just the, here are my credit cards, here's my bank account balance, I start to see personalization. I start to see almost ads, right? Kind of building off of what I was just talking about. They're going to give me a loan for X amount of dollars for my car. They're trying to push me for a home loan. They're trying to extend a line of credit. Now, in many cases, the power of this is that, one, from the back-end perspective, they're finding users that they can cross-sell to, that they can really more tightly engage. Because if they don't do that, and I find services at a different bank, maybe I go there. They lose my business. They may lose whatever revenue that I have. And so personalization is really key. The next piece, of course, is monetization, right? How can we find, beyond just cross-selling, how can we find ways to use AI to either find new trends, right, in our trades, reduce risk or de-risk platform, and of course, client engagement. How can we better engage with our customers? In the wealth management example, what we could do, right, from a banking perspective, you can use AI to, right, reduce the time to actually get information out to customers. So imagine you have an analyst. That analyst is producing reports, but it takes them weeks to get the data. Then they have to synthesize that data, pass it by someone, perhaps an MD or someone above them, and then it gets sent out to the client. That's been 2 weeks, 3 weeks, potentially even a month. That data is a little old. But now if we can reduce that time from weeks down to days, that data becomes dramatically more actionable. And it leads into other areas, right? Talking about de-risking, and more importantly, kind of that cloud-native modernization, and of course, regulatory compliance. The idea here is these trends are really only accelerating the pace of change, and as a result, the pace of change is also accelerating, right, the way that we look at and actually work with these. And so when we kind of take a step back, one of the big things that we want to do in this is not just talk about the macro, but also talk about how SingleStore kind of views this space. And the first one, when we start to think about this, is what we call an archetype. This is how SingleStore groups its customers and how we think about the market as a whole. The first one is real-time decision-making, what's called HTAP. Just by a show of hands, how many of you know what HTAP stands for? I see a couple of you. Many of them are SingleStore employees, which is good. Some of them are partners. So let's talk about that a little bit. SingleStore as a platform is in an interesting space. Transactions, analytics, and then of course search, right? Search being the lexical, your keyword search. You type into Google New York Times, right? Lexical search. On the other side, semantic search. It goes beyond just New York Times, but it could be what is the perhaps most popular article ever featured in the New York Times, right? That's a semantic search. And so what this allows us to do is to be able to take all of your data, bring it into one space, and then we can action that data really efficiently. One common language, one common platform, one area to scale up, scale down, and more importantly, one area that you can actually grow and develop knowledge in. And the benefit of that is when we start to build this out, what we can do with real-time decisioning under the HTAP process, which stands for, by the way, hybrid transactional and analytical processing, and then we add database platform at the end. But kind of fun there. And so it allows us to be more dynamic in our pricing, right? This is for customers and kind of use cases. We can help on fraud detection. And we can also, as I just talked about before, personalize. When I take the data and I can more efficiently match that data, bring it into one spot, I now have the ability to really make decisions off of that data. And so when we start to build out the archetypes, now we have our analytical processing, OLAP systems, whether they're cloud-based or on-prem, right? This is what kind of runs the world, whether we know it or not. And so underneath that, we have logistics and optimization, cybersecurity, telemetry monitoring. This is being able to see the data coming in, action that data, or do something off of that, right? Get some information out of it. And when we start to think about this, it leads us into dashboarding. Now, live dashboarding can be kind of an interesting, whether misnomer or not, but live dashboarding comes in two flavors. The one is your BI tools that you love, Power BI, Tableau, Cognos. The other side is real-time applications that take in the data, push it up, let's just say to a trader in real time, and now they can actually action off of that data. Now SingleStore, I mentioned before, highly concurrent, low latency, so it's that real-time side. The other piece, when we think about live dashboarding, is actually on what we would consider the clickiness, right? This is the speed at which I can actually change filters, I can go through and basically get access to my data. So it's not always about speed, but it's also about performance, right? So I go in, I can have more filters. Then when I filter, it's much more efficient. So now I can actually work with that data better. And as a result, customer-facing BI, right? Customer goes in, I want to see how my ad campaign is doing. I want to see how my trades are doing. We can do all that right there. Same with operational dashboarding. And the final one is your high volume applications, which when we think in the financial space is one of the big things that we really specialize in. This could be wealth management, right? We have high net worth individuals who, believe it or not, have short attention spans and they really want their answers immediately, right? If I had $50 million, I would, so I assume they would as well. And the idea here is trading systems and banking, and of course, IoT real time. Now, when we dig into this a little bit more, and we start to kind of peel back the onion, talk about where SingleStore is positioned. We have our data and AI applications. This can be everything from your BI piece all the way to the AI piece as well. And then you have SingleStore. Now, I'll let you kind of take this in, but this is what I was mentioning before on the HTAP side. Transactional, analytics, and search, okay? And so here, we're combining all those together. That's lexical, that's the semantic, and of course, all of these major features. Relational, you would expect. It's a SQL database at the end of the day. But geospatial, right? Kind of thinking back to that marketing example. Customer walks into a store. That's geospatial. We've geofenced that area. Customer goes in. We can now check and monitor that. Vectors, we can enable AI and have and are a full fidelity vector database. Key value pairs, meaning we can take in and work with JSON, time series data, great for financial services, right? And of course, full text. Right? The idea here is it kind of is a robust, do everything and whatever you really need kind of database. But the benefit here is not just in what it does, but what it can enable you to bring in. And so if we look here, we see Confluent. This is real-time streaming. We can see CDC data coming in, Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, MongoDB, right? Fun fact here, MongoDB, phenomenal at ingest. Great, great, great database. Have you tried analyzing large quantities of data on Mongo? Maybe some have, some haven't. But the idea here is MongoDB, phenomenal ingest, maybe not the best at analytics. And the benefit for that is, from a SingleStore perspective, I can run MQL, Mongo Query Language, in SingleStore, get and analyze that data anywhere from 100 to, we've actually seen it, generally about 1,000 times faster. Their language, no change. We simply bring the data in, analyze it, you now have your answer that much more efficiently. And we haven't changed anything, right? You still have your Mongo instance. And the same thing is true on the ETL side, right? When we start to think about what this enables, people have been talking, and I think one of the best examples is kind of what was talked about by Goldman Sachs, right? Iceberg as a main enabler or democratizer of data. The ability to both enhance and work with Snowflake and Databricks as a result, both directly and natively, as well as through Iceberg as an intermediary. And of course, we wouldn't be here if we're not talking about AI or LLMs. The big thing here is that SingleStore, unlike a lot of other platforms, is not saying we're going to run your AI for you. What we are saying is that we can work with any LLM on the market, public or private, and you can integrate that directly into SingleStore because we are agnostic. Take a database that's meant and built for this, integrate it with your favorite LLM trained on your data or separately, and then be able to actually action it. And here's the cool thing. We can basically be run anywhere. On-prem, public clouds, as you can see, really, sky's the limit, okay? And so what does this allow us to really do? Now, when we start to think about this a little further, one of the kind of cool options, and we start to break this out into, in this case, retail and commercial banking, right? We see a couple of the options. If you take a look at the orange, this is where we think that we're exceptional, right? GenAI Copilots, real-time wealth management dashboarding. Really a specialty of the database platform. Okay? Let's do it again. Financial technology. We just mentioned, right? Major driver of innovation in the space, both current and what we expect to see over the next 4 years. And from there, real-time GenAI is another great example. When we take this further, capital markets. Same thing, portfolio, securities inventory. And of course, last one, on payments and lending. The point here is that SingleStore, when you start to really position it in the market, is actually quite an interesting platform. It doesn't necessarily fit nicely and perfectly into one spot. And the reason for that is because we kind of can go end to end. Ingest, analytics, search, and you can really span that out. You can just do the ingest, just do the analytics, just do the search. Or you can go end to end. But here's the cool thing. If you think back to that last slide, one of the things I didn't mention is generally what we do. 70% of everything that we do is actually augmentation first. That means we're not ripping and replacing anything. We're saying, use us where it's most valuable to you. Right? We want to be basically working in the sandbox, not the biggest kid in the sandbox, kicking everyone out. Eventually, if you love the platform, and we think that you will, you'll replace other things with it. Right? But at least to start, it's a great place. And so this is actually quick customer stats that I think are kind of fun. 25% of our customers are actually in the financial services industry. And this is everything from some of the biggest banks that you may or may not have heard today, all the way to the smallest financial technology startups that we believe are going to disrupt the market. The idea here is they choose SingleStore because they see a couple major things, kind of major pieces I touched on before. One, common language is a huge one, right? SQL's pretty easy to learn. I learned it in college. I learned it out of college too, and it's been directly applicable here. But the cool thing is, when we start to think about what this enables, right? These aren't small numbers. I actually was kind of building out this number when I was thinking about this slide, right? 1 million orders, that's per second, right? When we start to scale that up, the other number was we could do 3 billion queries, right? Generally in about a day. And I said, is that important? Is that impressive? And then we started to think about what 1 million orders actually looks like, right, per second. You're talking on the order of like 8, 9 billion, right, orders being brought in a day. And the same thing is true on the concurrency side, this 50,000 concurrent users. Now, of course, this comes down to scale more than anything else. But the big thing here is that what we're enabling you to do is go beyond what we would consider the possible today. And that's kind of the benefit of the industry. We start small, and then you can scale and grow with us. And so when we start to build this out, right, the big thing is this. When you think about the status quo, right, so you're a company that has, let's just say, slow analytics and app performance, right? What we are able to do as a result is, right, when you start working with SingleStore, we can translate that for you. Those slow analytics, that poor app performance, when you change it, can actually be a revenue driver, right? We have better performance, we can scale, right, when we need to, and as a result, we have that personalization that I talked about before, anomaly detection, right? And I think you guys can agree, you probably hear it all the time, whether it's a bank, whether it's a company, whether it's my own mother that told me that she got hacked on her email. The reality is, right, AI is actually enabling us and allowing us to be able to be smarter and more effective with not just our time, but our resources. And when we start to think about this further, right, it kind of builds onto the legacy systems blocking AI adoption as a result. You've heard a lot, not just today, but over the last couple of years, right, since ChatGPT kind of blew up in 2020. AI adoption is coming, it's going to continue to push, and the reality is it will be a large revenue driver. We're working with a couple banks right now, and the big thing on their minds is that cross-pollination, that cross-selling. How can I drive further adoption of what my customers are already using that they may not know about to build out an ICP or an ideal customer profile for what they actually are? If I can cross-sell in, then I can sell more to them, and my customers are happier, and more importantly, it's stickier. They stick with the business longer. And of course, by changing that around, we again can increase revenue and enable modern AI and Gen AI applications. And of course, the other big thing, we can simplify. SingleStore, as I mentioned before, ingest, analytics, search as well. You can go end to end with it. You can choose just one spot. But at the end of the day, when we start to think about all the databases that you're using, even in AI, anytime someone talks to me about it, whether small company, big company, minimum, traditionally 3 to 5 databases that they're going to be using. Some for transactions, some for analytics, some for vector. Sometimes they have multiple, they have virtualization. There's a lot going on. And the idea is by reducing that, you focus in on 3 key things. One, you simplify the architectural stack, which means you can grow faster, more efficiently. You can simplify the language, which means you can hire better talent, right? And you don't have to spread that out across multiple people. And of course, you can grow more efficiently with that, right? So your application grows. I don't have to grow everything, so my costs don't balloon. And when we start to build this out further, right, and you can kind of see the last 2, we can scale. And of course, we start to reduce compliance gaps and data fragmentation. And so when we break this down, this is kind of how we view the world, right? You can increase your revenue, you can decrease your cost, or you can mitigate risk. This is how we sell. This is how we actually think about the world. This is what we try to provide to our customers. So if you take nothing else out of this presentation, here's the big idea. SingleStore really kind of fits in quite a variety of places. You can use us for transactions. You can use us for analytics. You can use us for search. You can go end to end. But the reality is at the end of the day, we're here to help you guys solve your problems, whether now or in the future. The benefit of working with a company like ours is when you start to think about this, we view the world the way you view the world. We want to make sure that we are working for you and with you. Okay? And with that being said, thank you very much for your time.